All right, it's now 3:02, so we should get started. Welcome to Pre-Shift, Tidbits of Wisdom for Everyday Use. My name is TJ Griffin, and I'm the corporate wine educator for Winebow. You may submit questions at any time during the webinar, but please use the Q&A rather than the chat bar to do so. Let me introduce your host. Master Sommelier Ron Edwards is the husband of one wife, the father of 5 girls, a surfer, and as you will see in just a moment, loves bow ties. He has over 29 years of hospitality experience, and since 2018, he is the director of wine education for Winebow. And now, here to discuss today's topic, Grapes Aren't Weird, We Are, Part 2, Master Sommelier Ron Edwards.
Well, hello. Hi, everyone. Thanks for that kind introduction, TJ. I really appreciate it, as always. It's great to be back with everybody. Took a little hiatus for vacation. We ought to do those things, right? And now we're back to talk about this subject of, the world's a really big place. There's a lot of awesome wine out there from a lot of different kind of grapes that may not be known to the person you're talking to when you're trying to sell them a bottle of wine or a glass of wine in a restaurant or at a retail location. So we're going to hit that subject again today, like we did last time. We're going to review some of the information at the beginning that was part of last presentation, just so that if you weren't there, we don't leave you in the dust and wondering what we're talking about. Make sense, DJ?
Yes, that makes sense to me.
And we've got some great guests on the line, so I'll look forward to questions from them. Shall we get started? So let's see here. The first category of grapes are the ones that just don't need to be sold. And those are our friends in both the retail industry and in the restaurant and hospitality industry. It's really an awesome advantage, at least for some of the wines in your program, to not require as much attention for you to get them in people's hands. The beauty of that is it's an easier thing to sell. The only downside of it is that they are going to get the attention, so you have to work harder to sell things that aren't those. And we're talking about, the big 5: Cabernet Sauvignon, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Grigio, Sauvignon Blanc, and, a few others that go along with that. Malbec, for instance, is pretty well known at this point. People don't have to think too hard. Zinfandel is pretty well known, even if its popularity is not as high as it once. And so these grapes and wines made of those grapes that have been commonly consumed around the globe, these are our friends, but there are more, right? You don't have to sell these. You should sell them because they make your guests comfortable, but they are not the only thing to entertain.
So some people, maybe not Zinfandel, but certainly the ones you mentioned before that, they're often called the international varieties, right?
Yeah, because they're planted just about everywhere. They're loved just about everywhere. And they're also often called the noble varieties. And there's a group larger than this that often get the idea of noble. And I think the main thing about that is popularity. And then some of those grapes in there also have demonstrated greatness over the course of time, both in ageability and in quality of wine. So they get a little bit higher prestige than they would otherwise. But yeah, definitely internationally known. And then there's everything else. And this is a big topic. And TJ, and you're well aware of this as you go through your WSET and working on your Master of Wine, there's an enormous number of grapes to entertain in the world. There's over 800 registered, because we know that they're not all registered, but 800 plus registered in Italy alone. There's definitely over 40 in Greece that are indigenous to that country. There's pushing 100 registered grape varietals in Portugal, most of which are not grape varieties you find somewhere else. There are dozens in the United States even that get very little attention compared to the big 5, and all sorts of really delicious wines that get relegated into uncomfortable at best and perhaps weird at worst in the eyes of those going out to spend their hard-earned money on wine and consume it themselves. I have great empathy for them because I feel the same way when I go shopping. But nonetheless, it even gets to the point that grapes like Syrah and Cabernet Franc get some resistance from the general populace because they're not the normal, right?
So We did, as you alluded to, we did have a prior Grapes Aren't Weird, We Are session where you talked about how to introduce these to folks, but there might be some folks on here that haven't seen it. So can you refresh our memories on how you introduce these?
Sure. Introductions are definitely needed for any grape that isn't well known. And I kind of look at this as these grapes are the friends that people didn't know they had yet, because they're still related to grapes they know well, either in flavor profile or structure, or just the pleasure of consuming them is very similar to something else that they already know they like. But, put yourself in their place. I'm very excited to see that Madeline Trufant is listening in today on this webinar, and she has had great influence over me in this, if in no other idea, in the idea of meeting the guests where they are, making sure, and she's had more influence than that, but this really rings true with me all the time, and I hear her voice in the back of my head. You can't expect them to come to you. You've got to meet them where they are. And so if all they know is Cabernet Sauvignon or Chardonnay or Pinot Grigio, you can't expect them to jump headlong into Gruner Veltliner or Zweigelt without some guidance and some association and an introduction to what to expect and a few other things that will get them comfortable. And so those introductions have to be relevant to each individual. It's not a one size fits all. You do really need to learn to read your customer, read your guests. But there are some ways to get those introductions started. And I really consider these context bridges because context can be a great friend for you. In the idea of TJ, if you're out having dinner, I have the advantage of, well, you ordered salmon. So I can talk around the idea of salmon to introduce you to a new grape varietal, perhaps, that you haven't had before. And today we're going to talk about a couple of Greek grapes, which are much dear to my heart. And that dish right in front of you would give me a bridge to move people beyond Chardonnay and into Assyrtiko, which is one of the grapes we're going to talk about today. The idea of being willing to walk across the bridge to them, admit that they are probably nervous. TJ, when was the last time you went out to a retail shop or a restaurant? I know it's probably been a while for the restaurants because we're all kind of in lockdown, but where you looked at the wine list and you knew somebody had put a lot of effort into it, but you were still uncomfortable because you recognized very little. And we do this all the time.
Yeah, when I was in New York, some restaurants seem to be having a contest about who can build the most esoteric wine list. And I like to think I have some knowledge about wine and grapes, and even I can't find something that I'm comfortable ordering. And it's a little bit daunting.
Yeah. And the real source of that uncomfortability is not so much, it's really whether or not you trust the person who built the list, but you don't really know them. You haven't met them, right? So then you're like, well, I don't recognize any of this, and I'm spending my money on this, and I want the experience that I came here looking for, which is that pleasure from wine, that whatever you think is the pleasure you're looking for from wine. So it's super important to figure out how to make them comfortable. Some of it's the way you design your wine list, how you orient your retail shelves, how you talk about wine to them, what words you use. Do you sound like a geek or do you sound like them? All of these things matter, but food pairing in the restaurant setting is an absolute gem of a way to get where they are, because you already know they're going to order that food. And because most people in America today have a concept of food and wine pairing is supposed to be a thing. Even if it's not an important thing to them, it's supposed to be a thing. And the most commonly searched wine item actually in the internet up until at least a year or so ago was wine and food pairing topics. So your general everyday customer is interested in this. They just don't know what to do with it yet. And so they've heard the rules of white with fish and red with meat, and they don't know if that's really true. And, at home, they open their favorite wine no matter what's on the table. So this is an opportunity to start a new conversation with them in a very comfortable way. And I would approach it from the concept of, this idea of, would you like to have a wine that really accentuates your food and vice versa? Or would you like to stay with the wine you're most comfortable with? I mean, those are honest questions, and their reaction to that tells you whether you can pull them into a new idea. The other is offer comfort and exploration. if I'm about to spend my money, TJ, you're sitting in the esoteric wine list, you're about to spend your money. What's going to make you comfortable is if they can connect with you in a flavor wise or a quality wise or a regional way with something you know, right? So if they're trying to sell you a Nebbiolo from a producer that you really don't know them, and you know in Piemonte there's a range of clean versus not so clean versus pristine versus modern and all these things that you know that most people don't, that's a barrier for you. Hey, connect me to a producer that I understand. In most of the cases of dealing with a normal everyday wine buyer, you're really talking about flavor profile and structure and making them feel like if they go out on a limb with you, you're not going to cut it off behind them. That taste from the glass pour list that gets them in the realm of the wine you're talking about, that guarantee that if I recommend this wine to you and you don't like it, just be honest. I can sell it by the glass. I can share it with the staff as a learning experience, but you will not have to drink it. Because at that point, you've hopefully gotten confident enough with the conversation that you feel like you are steering them someplace they can go. So all of those things are ways to build bridges. And we'll talk some more about that when we give the idea of each individual grape variety.
So you mentioned Assyrtiko. Is that how we're going to start with the Assyrtiko?
We're going to start with Assyrtiko.
Weird grape?
Well, actually, we're going to start with Ayurvedico, but I want to show you a wine list concept where I talk about giving wine list clues. You know, one of the things with the esoteric wine list is that's not such that it's not that making an esoteric wine list is a terrible thing to do to someone, but if you give them no way to figure out what they're looking at, then that's a bad thing. So I still believe you should put comfort wines on every menu, even if you feel like that's taking sales away from something else. Those comfort wines are what get people ready to order something else. There was a point in time many years ago when I asked an honest question of Madeline, is my wine list pretentious? And she very calmly said something that wasn't exactly that is pretentious, but made me say, okay, my wine list is pretentious. I need to go back and look at it and think about it from the consumer's perspective, and I made changes accordingly. This wine list was built alongside of, and we've seen this throughout this lecture series, but alongside of a normal everyday person who would look at the stuff as he was editing it to put it together for the menus and go, I have no idea what you're talking about here, Ron, and I'm your customer. And we worked and worked and worked to find a way to give both. So in this particular case, the categories are in weight orientation. It's a short list. I think that's better for guests anyway. And it's weight oriented, intensity increasing throughout the menu, lightest whites to richest whites, lightest reds to richest reds. Grape varieties are not grouped by grape variety if they don't belong there together. And then wines that are like each other are put together. So in this particular slide, you see that Arrieros Estate Assyrtiko is right there next to Chablis and next to a Chardonnay Riesling blend from Luigi Baldana, which is the Vira family. And it's in a similar price range. So you have three wines ranging from 49 to 65 that all offer a similar experience. Fresh, bright fruits, that's sort of same fruit profile. And one of them has a recommendation from the sommelier. But they're all great. And the one that's recommended also happens to be by the glass. So all of these things are giving the people an idea, oh, I might be comfortable with this and I could try it first before I commit to a bottle. So that was my strategy. And I sold a lot more Assyrtiko than you should sell in a town of 10,000 people in northern Michigan. But we're actually going to start with Ayurvedico. Ayurvedico is a red wine from Greece. It's an indigenous varietal. And the biggest barrier, honestly, to Ayurvedico is saying it. How are you doing with that, TJ?
Ayurvedico?
Very nice.
Excellent.
The idea here is this, if we want to cheat and just go English, it's St. George is the translation, which is very nice. But where are we going to bridge the context here is first and foremost, we have to start thinking along the lines of, wow, if I'm not comfortable with, they won't be, right? So confidence is huge. Finding resources, either a Greek friend of yours or YouTube or Google Translate, something that will get you to the point that you feel good about pronouncing it. So for instance, one of our really great wines here inside the Winebow portfolio made out of Ayurvedico is from Yea Estate. So Ye is not that hard to say. Ayorgitiko isn't that hard to say if you just slow down and listen to yourself. But being able to say it to the mirror confidently is the beginning point. Because if you can't pronounce it, they're not going to order it because they sure can't pronounce it. And make sure that they have the opportunity to order by number. The main reason for bin numbers on wine lists is to avoid making someone pronounce a wine they're uncomfortable with. Because if they'd have to do that, they probably won't order it. I mean, I'll admit to you freely that my French is terrible. But I have to use the names on the labels in dining rooms nonetheless. So how do we break down the barriers? First, we have to be confident with the name and its style. I think the other thing that really can be a great barrier remover here is that you're inviting them on a journey to Greece and give them some sense of the warmth and wonderfulness of the culture of Greece and its rising tide of excellent wine. There's just so much ancient, wonderful culture there, as well as the modern culture that I kind of characterize it like this. The Greeks are so wonderfully proud of being Greek that they want you to be Greek too. And so they invite you into their world when you're there, and it's just a warm and wonderful thing. And having that sort of conversation about the wine makes the wine feel like it's exciting and wonderful, and maybe I should join into this. The other thing that's really great for Ayorgitiko is having the context of Mediterranean food. So if you happen to be working with a Mediterranean dish, it's really easy to have a conversation about a Mediterranean wine. Most people have to be led into the idea of Greece as a wine source. They don't have to be led into the idea that it's in the Mediterranean. So it's a good place to start. The next place is context. So, and that's menus context, and then also placing the wine in a context that they might be more familiar with. I think the closest approximation of Ayorgitiko in a wine they might have heard of would be Sangiovese. You could bring up Chianti if you like. They're not identical, but Greek red wines have the tartness of Italian red wines. And so Sangiovese is a wine a lot of people have had Chianti, and they can latch onto the idea that it has refreshing red fruits and it has that sort of drying texture to it. Another option, if they've never had Italian Chianti, would be to talk about Merlot in that more European vein. It's not the big, rich, heavy style of Merlot, but the lighter, more refreshing, fruit-forward version of Merlot. I have used Malbec as an explanation if they've had enough experience with Argentina to know the difference between, something from the altitude of Uco Valley, perhaps. I have used Syrah many times because Syrah is more fruit-forward, especially if they've had European Syrah, where it is a little bit more tart black fruits, and Ayorgitiko has the same sort of thing. And if they like Italian wine in general, it's a very natural transition over to Greek wine. There's a lot of similarities. Remember, they're not that far apart, and a lot of cultural exchange went through in the world of wine exchange, as well as everything else through the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, and then all the years afterwards. If they're familiar with European and Bordeaux, you've got that customer. Petit Chateau Bordeaux or maybe Right Bank Bordeaux is a good place to start your conversation to say, if you like that, I'm pretty sure you're going to like this, and then give them the whys. We already talked about pronouncing it comfortably and confidently, and pronounce it for them. Don't wait for them, help them out. And you can make them more comfortable by smiling and saying, St. George is the English for this, if you just want to say that. That's great. I would put them also on a wine list where they are in a similar place. So for me, we're talking about putting them in a wine list near Merlot, Barbera, Malbec, Chianti. I actually also like very much the idea of putting them near Rioja, even though Rioja is such a very different experience because of the oak aging.
So you've talked about pronunciation quite a bit, and I find it to be an important point because, Shakespeare said it, pronounced it trippingly on the tongue. It can make you sound like a real expert if you know how to pronounce it.
It does, and it starts to make people feel comfortable with you, just like they do when we talked about your personal appearance in the first 30 seconds. If you come up sloppy, they're not going to trust you. If you come up neat, clean, and orderly, you've got a good start. If you then pronounce what you're talking about, both menu item and wine-wise, as if you know how to pronounce it, even if you're wrong, The important part is that you sound as if you know how to pronounce it. And then if you meet somebody that speaks the language and corrects you, accept it and go, yes, let me practice with you so you can be even better next time. There's also some idea here of like tying fruits together that are common, right? So this idea of the fruit profile of Ayuritico to me is red ripe forest berries with blue and blackberry and black cherry all sort of combined together, depending on the producer and depending on how much oak aging there is. And those are very familiar flavors to people that they like and can easily latch onto, and you can tie them to other grapes that have similar. So you could use similar descriptors for Merlot and Syrah, and the red forest berries for Sangiovese for sure. The blue and black can even go well into that Malbec range. And there's a range of Greek Ayuritico from light and refreshing to bold and ageable and driven by some oak aging and so forth. So you just need to know which one you're talking about. I find the texture of Ayuritico to be a little prickly, where the tannin is never edgy and hard, and it ranges from sort of soft and let's drink this tomorrow to a wine of substance that really does need to sit in front of red meat, lamb, etc. If you got the food context down, kebabs of all kinds and vegetables, think Greek, right? Duck, both seared and confit, earthy flavors like lentils and mushrooms. It's really a great wine with Mediterranean fare, the olives, olive oil, tomatoes, garlic base that it goes into a lot of those dishes. And it'll easily work around grilled steak and that kind of thing. But it also has this wonderful ability to meld into lighter foods, like even chicken or rich fish. So it's pretty malleable, and that's one of the other reasons to enjoy it.
But you don't have to serve it exclusively with Greek dishes.
No, actually, the most likely place to find a great bottle of it would be someplace that isn't Greek, perhaps. Depends on the restaurant. An upper tier Greek restaurant's going to have some really great options from Nemea, probably. But I find that people like me outside of Greek restaurants are the ones that are really excited about it these days. And you'll find it on that esoteric wine list in New York that confuses you, perhaps. All right, so let's go to Assyrtiko. And by the way, you're still welcome to put in Q&A at any time. We'll get to them as we have time. Assyrtiko, that one's relative. Out of all the Greek pronunciations, that one's probably the easiest. Assyrtiko. You good with that one, TJ?
I think so. I don't know if I have that subtle rolling R that you do, but I'm working on it.
Well, that's all right. I don't know if it's. I didn't realize I was rolling it. So there you go. Hopefully, I'm supposed to roll it. Assyrtiko is native to the Greek island of Santorini, but it's not just grown on Santorini, and it has all kinds of great applications because, well, I'll just be honest. I think that Assyrtiko as a grape for wine is in the top 5 white wines globally for me for overall quality. And I know lots of people are going to argue me down, but I've had enough examples of the grape, especially from Santorini, to say this is a truly unique and noble grape variety. What I guess is the argument against that so far is the ability to translate it to some other location. But we're not hard on Nebbiolo, and Nebbiolo is really only at its best so far in the world of wine in Piemonte, right? And then a little bit up in Valtellina. So I don't feel like that's an argument against its greatness. It is now in Australia. It's grown extensively on the mainland now because they see how well it does in Santorini and they want to grow it other places. And like in our portfolio, the Papianakos Assyrtiko grown on chalk soil, calcareous soil, just outside of Athens is delicious. And I think the wine really has potential in the future to be really outstanding as the vines age. It'll never taste like Santorini because it's grown on calcareous instead of volcanic, but it shouldn't have to, right? I mean, Chardonnay from Chablis doesn't taste anything like Chardonnay from Napa, but that doesn't make them one great and one not great. So that's really the issue for me, is the Assyrtiko has that depth of substance that makes it a great white wine. But what is it like? That's kind of important. First of all, saying it well, again, Assyrtiko is really all that starts right there. It's a great year-round suggestion because in this winter, it has the depth and complexity of what you might sell to someone who likes white wine and wants maybe, that middle tier of intensity Chardonnay. But it also is an amazing friend to food. I've almost never served it with food that it didn't like. And we have Assyrtiko at the house on a regular basis because it is my wife's favorite grape and my favorite white. So, well, it's tied with Riesling. But it works with classic French butter sauces. That means you can put it in a bistro of just about any kind. It works with Germanic style food like schnitzel and Germanic foods in general. It's obviously great with grilled octopus. I mean, that's from its hometown. It would actually be really great with like spring pea risotto from Piemonte. It would be fabulous with seafood pasta dishes. It's great with roast chicken. And it just keeps going and going and going because it has this ability to be both cutting through flavor and not alienating dishes. And one of the reasons for that is its tremendous acidity. It has the same level of pH as your really laser focused German Riesling. It's, a Assyrtiko out of Santorini is usually hovering around 2.9 on the pH scale, which is really low. After that, it's, where do we put it on the wine list? We put it on the wine list alongside of unoaked New World Chardonnay, white Burgundy. You can put it alongside high impact whites like Austria, Germany. You can put it alongside of Italian whites from the north. It works. You can put it in that range between the Sauvignon Blanc section and the Chardonnay section where you start to add weight, but you start to drop off aromatics. Those are all great places for it to live. You saw where I had it on the wine list in northern Michigan. And other than that, fruit profile is kind of key. So if I told you, TJ, that a wine that's in front of you tasted like ripe apple, pears, and pineapple, and yellow citrus, what grapes would you come up with that probably apply?
New World Chardonnay would be my first guess, but even perhaps
it's pretty tart citrus though.
Oh, so maybe some Sauvignon Blanc.
That's possible.
Area, or some warmer climate Riesling.
Yeah, you could go there.
Even some that would make me think you didn't say floral, but even some Viogniers would be in that world. I think.
Okay, because I find worldwide that Chardonnay, for instance, the world's most popular grape besides Pinot Grigio, right, has yellow citrus, apple, pear, and pineapple of some level. If it's really tart pineapple, it's probably European. If it's riper pineapple, it's from a warmer climate. And then other things get added in for winemaking and so forth. And Assyrtiko carries all those, but it also adds some really exciting citrus like kumquat and mandarin orange. And then the thing that really sets it off in Santorini, which is what that blue water picture there is all about, is that definitive sea salt, saline, oceanic note that just is unmistakable. And it is so gorgeous. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so good with food is that it has that acid backbone and then this saline saltiness that, it's like putting salt on your food without having to. It will have a lightly smoky, flinty note when it's from volcanic soil. And then when I see it grown on the mainland, it tends to be a little bit lighter weight and definitely has but it has that citrus drive that makes it very refreshing. And so it has a really wide range of like and dislike, more to the point, really wide range of likes for people who like white wine. And I've served it to a few people who say they don't like white wine who also liked it. And I think that might be because there is just a touch of tannin that comes through, especially in Santorini from a little bit of skin contact along the way. And the grape skins get pretty thick on the island because they have to protect themselves from the Etesian wind and the really harsh environment.
You said unoaked New World Chardonnay. Is Assyrtiko unoaked?
Well, there's both, and so that's how you get to choose. You can find both styles of Assyrtiko, both unoaked and with oak aging. Most of the Greeks, if they're aging in an oak, are using French Barrique. And once you put it in French Barrique, it starts to remind you a whole lot of Côte de Beaune Chardonnay because you have that low pH and all of the barrel undertones, and then about the same fruit profile. I took the oak aged version of our Gyros to Florida and served it in a country club with a demographic of people who are very much into white Burgundy and California Chardonnay, and they loved it. They bought, I don't know what they bought, like 15 6-packs between 25 people. So it really hit them where they love wine. They just had no idea that they loved this wine until they tasted it.
So those are some of your brands that you like for Assyrtiko. You mentioned Argyros.
Yeah, Argyros is fabulous. We bring that one in. One of the standard offerings also is Yea, has both a Nemea estate, and they also have a Santorini estate. They're up north. You see Assyrtiko blended a lot with other grapes, like blended with Sauvignon Blanc by Thema. Yerovaslu also blends it with Sauvignon Blanc, and I think also Malagousia. And then Sigalas is a legendary producer on the island of Santorini, which is well known in the U.S. among people who know Greek wine. And Hatzidakis is a very good producer. And Santorini is really small. There's not very many producers, not very much wine to make. So you have to embrace that. And then if you end up in Australia, oh no, my mind just went blank. Barry.
Jim Barry?
Jim Barry. Jim Barry Wines makes an Assyrtiko now. They have it planted on their property, and it's good. And that is that for this week, as far as the information is concerned.
So if you have any questions before we wrap up, now would be the time to ask them. I wanted to ask you something because I've seen this done, and it wasn't, I don't think it was intended to be bad, but it was very unsuccessful. We're talking about pronunciation. Mm-hmm. Have you ever seen, or have you ever corrected a guest's pronunciation when they try to pronounce something, or do you just ignore it?
Well, I will tell you that most of the hospitality, the mistakes that can be made, I have made them at least once, which is why I continue to try to stay humble about what I know now versus what I knew then. I have intentionally corrected pronunciation once, and then realized what an idiot I was and never intentionally did it before. But sometimes, even when you repeat it back to them and you use your pronunciation versus theirs, I'm not even saying right and wrong, but yours versus theirs, they become defensive, like, oh, well, that's how it's said. And that is one of those traps I have fallen into over and over again by accident. And I'm always backpedaling out of it. So I have great empathy for people in that regard. And I normally spin it along the ways of, you know what? I don't speak that language, and I might not have it right either. So either way is fine with me. We're both talking about the same wine. We're good. Is the way I normally backpedal out of it. But it is an easily sprung trap, even just by repeating it back to them. And out of habit, you pronounce words the way you pronounce them, and it's very hard to just suddenly adjust and say it their way, so to speak. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, well, you're right. Even just saying it correctly, if you say it with the wrong, I don't know, intonation or attitude, you might come off as if you're correcting, which is certainly, I don't think, something you want to do with your guests. We have a question here. Hold on one second. Okay, this is from, looks to be an Italian man, Salvatore Galati. Have you ever tried to design a wine list by food that it matches instead of varietal or flavor profiles?
No, but I think it'd be a great idea. Well, that would be so ideal in the world of a restaurant that leans on pairing menus, right? So yes, I've done it by pairing menu, but to have a restaurant that has a daily menu where you have these 7 dishes and you have a pool of wines, and for these 7 dishes, you have these 3 wines for each dish that probably work. I think that'd be a lot of fun, Salvatore. And I would be happy to participate in such a thing, but I haven't had that opportunity so far.
Yeah, it sounds like it'd be labor intensive, but a lot of fun to do.
It'd be a labor of love for sure. When I worked at Tapawingo in Northern Michigan, we had pairing menus every day. So every day I was coming up with something to work with those 5 different items. So it would just be, you'd have your set of wines and then you just apply them differently each day. That'd be a really great exercise. I don't know how successful it would be with the public, but it would be a lot of fun to try.
Well, speaking of Italian, I've heard some people opine that one of the reasons for the success of Italian wines in the U.S. was was the proliferation of really more Italian American cuisine after World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And you were great about showing a variety of different dishes that both of those grapes could pair with, because I've heard people say, oh, we can't sell Greek wines or Portuguese wines or fill in the blank because we don't have that population around here. But these are not wines that are restricted to a cuisine or a food or a population, right?
No, they're not, because as we've kind of tried to lay out through this, these wines are comfortable flavor profiles that the guest will like. They just haven't tried the wine yet. They've had other wines they like just very similar to this wine. They haven't tried that wine yet. And so I always think about it as I'm about to introduce you to one of your new best friends, and you just haven't met this person yet, right? How do you ever get to a circle of friends, right? You have to go beyond what you know and reach out to a group of people you don't know. And wine grapes are the exact same way. You have to reach out once in a while and find a treasure. And the quality of wine is so high in the world right now, kind of globally, that it's, most wines are enjoyable at some level, even if it's not your favorite thing. So this is a great time to explore. There's never been a better time in the world to explore the rest of the world of wine that you haven't tried.
I think that's a good spot to end. It looks like to be a little spelling error here.
Yep.
I think our next pre-shift is 2 weeks from today.
2 weeks from today.
So that would be September 8th. It's the day after Labor Day.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, 3 p.m. Eastern time. And the subject is the value of technique.
Yep. We're going to talk about how service really relies on the attitude of hospitality at its core, but great service technique and using the skill set of being a great service professional can never be undervalued. It's what sets great service apart from enjoyable service, is the difference between attitude, the right attitude without good technique, and the right attitude with great technique. That's the difference between a good dinner and a world-class experience.
Well, I look forward to seeing and hearing all about it. Thank you. Oh, we do have one more quick question. See if we can sneak it in. Yes. Great point. Following up, humble psalms will succeed in selling those types of wines. Absolutely. Humility can never be overpraised, I think.
Correct.
Thank you so much to everybody. It's greatly appreciated here. We hope to see you next time. Tell a friend. And thank you, Ron, as always. We'll see you in a couple weeks.